What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a discussion video, really, I would say, about the game that I would love to see Larian Studios make next. Because while Larian Studios is certainly a hot topic of discussion in terms of games studios these days, thanks to Baldur's Gate 3, I've been with them a little bit longer than that, with the first of their games that I've ever played actually being Divinity Original Sin 2, like a great many people, but having been so enamored with that game, I immediately knew that I needed to know everything about that universe, and as a result, I went back and played all of them. And if you're unaware, there's actually a lot of Divinity games. Divine Divinity, Beyond Divinity, Divinity 2, Divinity Dragon Commander, Divinity Original Sin 1, and Divinity Original Sin 2. And I have played and enjoyed pretty much all of those, and then obviously Baldur's Gate 3. Now, probably worth a mention that Larian Studios has actually made other games as well. I believe like real-time strategy game was their first one, called the LED Wars or something. And then they also made a bunch of like educational games to keep the lights on. And I admit I'm unfamiliar with those, but it is also pretty well known at this point that Larian Studios passed on making a Baldur's Gate 4 or continuing to work with Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast or, D&D in general, really, as a result. And given, honestly, Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast behavior, it's really not too much of a surprise, I would say. We also know, however, that they are obviously working on whatever their next project is, and while it is probably going to be a while before we hear anything about that, obviously, speculation has already run rampant about what it is, what it could be, that kind of thing, and while I am more than happy to just let them do their thing, as they have proven several times over that tends to work out for them and everybody else involved, I do nonetheless have my own sort of dream project for them to actually work on. And as probably is no surprise, it's a game in the Divinity universe, because they have a lot of open questions to, I would say, explore and take on within that universe. It's also their own original IP, and as many people are well aware, it's an IP that I love. I've talked about this before, but this channel actually at one time was basically just a Divinity lore channel from where I, again, played Original Sin 2 and just had to know everything about it and made videos and shared that with people. And in many ways, I would say my foray into doing that was kind of my first bit of actual success on this platform, as a lot of that is kind of obscure and niche. And while you are starting to see videos from other people, to this day, and for a long period at one point, I was pretty much the only person that would come up if you searched Divinity lore, which a lot of people did because they loved Original Sin 2. But where I'm ultimately going with this is that basically what I want to see Larian do is continue the Divinity franchise, as is probably obvious at this point, but I'm obviously going to give you a bit more of specifics here, so I can put all that rampant lore knowledge to use. Now, the sort of logical next step, I think, if you were looking at continuing that IP, would probably be either Divinity 3 or Divinity Original Sin 3, and that is an important distinction, though in this case I don't think it would really matter. But for those who don't know, Divinity Original Sin 2 and Divinity 2 are actually two separate games. And that's important because Divinity 2 actually takes place around 60 or so years after Original Sin 2. This means a few things. For starters, you can do stuff like imply what some of the canonical endings and things were, but this is probably a good point to mention that Larian did not start getting really into the lore and caring about the lore of their own universe until they started doing their Kickstarter projects, Original Sin 1 and Original Sin 2. That's when they started to take that more seriously, and as a result, if you want to poke holes in some of this stuff, it's honestly not all that difficult to do. Nonetheless, Divine Divinity, Beyond Divinity, and Divinity 2 Ego Draconis and its expansion Flames of Vengeance largely revolved around the story of Lucian the Divine as well as his ill-begotten son, Damien the Damned One. Now, if you've only played Original Sin 2, you've probably maybe seen this name in passing. Damien's at least, Lucian's obviously a pretty big part of the story there. But Damien's story was never actually finished. Divinity 2 kind of ends on a pretty big cliffhanger. But interestingly enough, Divinity Original Sin 2 also leaves us with a couple of open questions for the franchise, namely, what does the God King do in the wake of the events of Original Sin 2, whatever those happen to be canonically? Now, thanks to everything that happens in these series, we can actually kind of guess that I would say purging all source is the most likely thing that happens happened, but it's not the only option. The reason for this being, Lucian the Divine is present in Divinity 2, 60 or so years after Divinity Original Sin 2, which means, as is a running theme here, Lucian is the worst thing in the universe, and he continues to be successful at every turn. In fact, many of Rivellon's problems within this setting are the result of none other than Lucian the Divine and his own personal failings. But those mistakes really started all the way in Divine Divinity, when he found an infant who had been embedded with a piece of chaos that came from the Sword of Lies, which is the subject of that first game. The protagonist, unnamed at the time, who turns out to be Lucian, is in fact not up for killing an infant, which fair enough, but it is also the case that the ritual was successful, and a piece of the chaos god, Chaos, was imparted into Damien. Now, if you are not super deep into Divinity lore, which to be fair, a lot of people are not, while Original Sin 2 and many of the other games will tell you all about the 7 gods, what it is actually a little cryptic about is that those 7 aren't the only gods. In fact, just within their own pantheon, they're excluding one of them, the god of the demons, Chaos. He was so powerful that the other 7 didn't like the guy and basically teamed up to banish him and his demons to the realm of Tartarus. Being patient, powerful, and malevolent, Chaos obviously pulled a bunch of strings to impart a piece of himself into the Sword of Lies and then eventually into Damien. Lucian goes on to raise Damien. It obviously does not go well, and ultimately Lucian imprisons Damien in the realm of Nemesis, a realm that is controlled by the demons but not where they are from, which is Tartarus. So inadvertently, Damien kind of gets trapped into a realm with the demons there, who are actually kind of in service to Damien because he has that piece of chaos, their god, inside of him, effectively kind of making him like the demon's version of a godwoken, or a champion of said deity, basically. So it's not exactly as foreboding a place for him as it would be for anyone else. And coincidentally, there is actually another race there who worships a different god, who seems to be part of a different pantheon altogether, though I would be surprised if they ever wound up doing anything with that. But basically there's an oppressed people here called Larian, just as a bit of interesting information for you. Nonetheless, the subject of Beyond Divinity, which takes place a couple decades after Divine Divinity, is all about how Damien escaped from Nemesis. But here's where it gets really interesting. That actually only takes place about 5 or so years before Divinity Original Sin 2. And in Original Sin 2, there's only passing mentions of Damien. There's a few things here and there, but what's interesting especially about it is that the Black Ring is an active cahoots, so to speak, with the demons there. And the thing is, those are 2 groups that would not normally work together, and they seem to be doing so only passingly here, and Damien is nowhere to be found despite being free from his prison at this time. In fact, as far as the canonical games go, he doesn't really do much of anything until Divinity 2 about 60 years later. In that game, we know that he captures and imprisons Lucian the Divine, who goes missing, and then Damien essentially takes over all of Rivellon, and you, as the last Dragon Knight in that game, go about fighting Damien and trying to push him back, which can be seen then in the expansion Flames of Vengeance, where you ultimately free Lucian, but he never actually catches Damien at the end of it. All you manage to do is free the Divine, who could theoretically fight Damien back. So, all of that to say, what happened to Damien, what is going on with this god of demons, Chaos, what's going on with the Ron in Nemesis, what actually happened after Divinity Original Sin 2, was all of Source purged from the world, and Lucian was in fact acting as a false divine, which is perhaps why he was so easy to be kidnapped and imprisoned by Damien nonetheless. Could it involve some epic team-up between them and the God King of the Voidwoken, the remnants of the Eternals mentioned in Original Sin 2, and the race of the gods themselves, really? There are simply so many avenues of lore and questions and things they could dive into, and it is my sincere hope that I get answers to all of those questions one day, as I really love that IP and I would love to play more of it. To continue on that thread a little bit, if the source was all purged from the world, they could actually continue on from the Dragon Knight side of things. So Dragon Knights only, again, make a brief appearance in Divinity Original Sin 2. I actually made a lore video about them specifically, as they are very interesting. But they've already done that a little bit in Divinity 2. You play as one, which sees you turning into a dragon and fighting these aerial battles and stuff. And if they wanted to incorporate that somehow as a measure of interesting game mechanics in some of their new CRPG systems that are incredibly reactive in terms of both how you can use the play space, that is to say all the environmental reactions that both Original Sin 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 are known for, that they've clearly built out the engine for. I think they could do something really, really interesting and special there, in a way that continued on from what they've built previously, while dropping perhaps some of the more frustrating things like the incessant ground effects in Original Sin 2, which can get out of hand by the end of the game, while also potentially enjoying some of that reactivity of Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of how you can interact with the environment, including things like elevation, breakable objects, all this other stuff that they've kind of been building up to. I would hate to see that left by the wayside as they move forward, and obviously from everything I've mentioned is kind of pushing me more in the realm of CRPGs, as that is both the genre I enjoy the most and also what I like from Larian the most, but it's not, I would say, explicitly required either. They have messed around with a lot of other genres previously. As you've probably seen on screen, Divinity 2 was more of like a third-person action title, and I could see them trying to stretch their legs a bit in a bit of a different direction in that regard. But if I'm being really honest, like genre, all that stuff, I'm more than happy to leave the details up to Larian on that one. I more than trust them with it at this point, but ultimately I need answers. I need to know what happened after all of those individual events throughout the Divinity games, all of these characters they set up. And while it wasn't exactly the start of my YouTube journey in full, it definitely was the thing that initially sort of put me on the map, so to speak, and man oh man do I want to cover more of this series. Having not only a new game in the series to cover, but also the opportunity to go back and sort of amend and redo some of those lore videos and things, I would just be having a blast. That would be my own personal wish list for what Larian does next. But truth be told, with as much as I've enjoyed basically everything Larian's done, I'm more than happy to simply see what they wind up putting out, and I think they've more than earned the luxury of taking their time with that. But if anything ever does come out for the Divinity series, that's going to be like one of the top 3 games I really want to wind up covering. For today and this video though, I think that's pretty much going to do it. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If nothing else, I hope this video maybe inspired you to check out some of the Divinity lore out there. My own videos, while honestly a little on the old side and obviously up to a different quality standard, frankly, are nonetheless still accurate if you're interested in checking those out. But again, for today, that's pretty much going to do it. So certainly hope you enjoyed all that. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.